The war was over, even if no one dared to say it aloud. The Concorde's strongest fleets had been torn apart. Their elite strategists vaporized with the destruction of Cornwall Station. The Vorlax Dominion wasn't just winning. They were erasing opposition at a pace so brutal, even resistance felt pointless. Every species once proud of its martial legacy was now reduced to huddling in the dark corners of burned-out colonies, praying the swarm wouldn't reach them next. Communications were collapsing system by system. Messages were now brief, broken, or simply screams before silence. Humanity, new to the stars, hadn't been considered a serious player. They were enthusiastic, yes. Inventive, sure, but small, limited. Just another upstart species with short tempers and big dreams. The Concorde gave Earth a seat out of courtesy, not necessity. Their ships were crude by galactic standards. Their soldiers too emotional. Their culture too fractured. But they were willing, eager even, so they were sent to distant fronts where their loss wouldn't sting too badly. Disposable, some called them behind closed doors. Then came Vega Prime. It was supposed to be a joint operation. A last stand. Multiple Concorde fleets. Defensive arrays built into the orbit. A trap meant to cripple the Vorlax advance. But the swarm came through in numbers the Concorde still doesn't believe are possible. 6 billion drones. Bioships faster than light. Minds fused into one endless voice of hate. The battle lasted less than 40 minutes. Human ships were the first to charge. The first to fall. Their final transmission, hold the line. Static followed. That was the moment hope began to rot. Species began retreating. Even the proud Ilvari, who had once stood against the Quran fire rain for 2 centuries, folded their wings and abandoned outposts. The Vorlax didn't just destroy, they devoured. Planets fell silent, not just physically, but biologically. Life simply stopped. There were whispers of a nanoplague, something that broke the chain of evolution in a system permanently. Entire ecosystems rendered sterile. The galaxy was watching itself die in slow motion. And humanity? What remained of it? A few colonies. Some rogue captains in deep space. Scattered marines from shattered units. The Earth Council declared emergency silence and vanished from the public eye. No one knew where they were or if they were alive. The Concorde tried to reach out. No answer. A few ambassadors muttered that humans had accepted extinction, that perhaps it was best they did. Better dignity in surrender than oblivion through defiance. But in the uncharted ice of Erebos Theta, a forgotten moon near the galactic fringe, a signal pulsed. One no Concorde species knew existed. It was old code, buried during the first Earth-Venus conflict, Project Lazarus. A final directive triggered only when loss became absolute. Conventional war is over. Humanity will adapt. The activation wasn't dramatic. No global broadcast. No anthem. Just a list of names illuminated deep underground. Some long presumed dead. Others dishonorably discharged for inhuman conduct in wartime. But that was the point. Project Lazarus wasn't about preservation. It was about resurrection through transformation. No more councils. No more rules of engagement. No more moral debates. Only results. The message sent to those selected was blunt. Earth is gone unless we become what they fear. Deep black units began moving. Men and women altered beyond recognition. Cybernetic augments paired with unstable AI. Experimental minds bred for asymmetric war. Training grounds once shut down for psychological violations reopened. They weren't soldiers. They weren't heroes. They were engineered for something singular. Ruin. A rogue fleet, unmarked and unregistered, left Erebos Theta without a trace. No names. No flags. Just silence. Elsewhere, the Vorlax continued advancing. The Concorde begged for reinforcements that never arrived. Diplomats talked of negotiated peace. Nothing worked. The swarm only accelerated, sensing the scent of a dying galaxy. But something shifted. A Vorlax breeding world was found turned to glass, melted from orbit with radiation signatures no species recognized. A Concorde scout ship investigating the ruins vanished. Only fragments returned, each etched with the same words scorched into its hull in Terran glyphs. Begin. None could predict it, but something was coming back from the edge. Something human. And it didn't care about survival. It only cared about vengeance. They were called Lazarus units, but they weren't units anymore. They were equations of destruction, variables in a war that had left logic behind. Each one born from collapse, shaped by failure, and trained in isolation for a future no one wanted to believe would arrive. When it did, they didn't celebrate. They activated. What returned to the stars wasn't the same species that once asked for a seat at the Concord's table. This time, humanity wasn't asking for anything. The first strike didn't even look like warfare. A Concord ship under Vorlax siege suddenly stopped broadcasting. No weapons fired. No defenses deployed. A Lazarus agent had embedded herself 3 weeks prior under a false identity. She rerouted life support, locked internal doors, and purged atmosphere selectively. In the final seconds, she vented a modified biological agent through the ship's recycling system. The Vorlax consumed the infected vessel and carried the virus into one of their breeding spheres. 17 hours later, that sphere imploded as its own population turned on itself. The Concord was outraged. Biological warfare had been outlawed since the Third Spiral Compact. Human response? Laws don't apply when extinction is the consequence of playing fair. No apology. No justification. Only the chilling fact that the tactic worked. Word spread quickly. Human tactics weren't strategies, they were punishments. Gravity well mines hidden in the orbits of dead stars. EMP pulses laced with quantum feedback to short out hive coordination over multiple sectors. One incident involved turning a comet into a kinetic missile aimed at a Vorlax convoy. 6 ships disintegrated before they knew they were under attack. Survivors whispered about enemy ships appearing from behind moons, from inside clouds, even from broken stations assumed abandoned. Lazarus didn't fight conventionally. They redefined the term. Other species began to whisper in corridors and encrypted channels. Were the humans insane? Had they gone rogue? Or had they been holding this back all along? Concord leadership issued warnings about cooperating with these rogue Terrans. But systems facing annihilation started reaching out anyway. No one else was winning. The Vorlax weren't slowing. But the humans, they were something else. Entire Vorlax fleets began avoiding human influence systems. It wasn't because the humans had superior numbers. They never did. It wasn't better technology. It was the unpredictability, the brutality, the cost. A single Lazarus cruiser, with a crew of 19, collapsed a Vorlax colony hosting over 3 million drones by detonating a captured Vorlax queen and triggering a hive feedback loop. The loss forced the Vorlax to recall fleets to reinforce their interior. For the first time since the war began, they hesitated. The Concord refused to credit humanity directly. But alien strategists began studying human records in secret. Not the official military archives, but the darker entries. The ones about Earth's civil wars, insurgencies, asymmetrical fighting, and zero-sum ideologies. One Concord scholar famously concluded, humans evolved for conflict. Peace is just an anomaly in their history. That line circulated in every command center before being formally banned for broadcasts. Lazarus teams started operating beyond known space, striking preemptively at suspected Vorlax breeding zones. When there was no intel, they created it, planting fake signals to bait enemy scouts, then erasing them. In one case, a team left a trail of destroyed outposts arranged in a perfect spiral pointing toward a dead sun. When the Vorlax sent a fleet to investigate, a dormant singularity detonated and consumed the entire system. Behind every act was a message. We're not fighting to win. We're fighting to erase the threat entirely and permanently. The psychological shift rippled through the enemy. Concord analysts began noting changes in Vorlax swarm behavior. Less aggression, more retreating. Intercepted hive chant frequencies began to include a new pattern, translated loosely as the red ones are death. They were referring to Lazarus units. Yet even among humanity, there was division. Not all humans supported Lazarus. Some colonies rejected the brutality, but their voices faded. In the face of extinction, those who hesitated were left behind. The war had moved beyond ideals. In the outer rings of the Alaris system, a Lazarus strike resulted in the first capture of a live Vorlax signal core. Upon interrogation, it repeated one phrase endlessly. "You are not prey. You are contamination." The message was relayed to Earth's Hidden Council. The response came back cold. Then let them choke. From a position of irrelevance, humans had become the tipping point. Not because they were stronger, smarter, or more numerous, but because they refused to lose. Every loss was adapted. Every defeat analyzed and weaponized. They didn't fear the dark. They walked into it willingly, dragging their enemies with them. What the galaxy had seen as desperation was, in truth, transformation. And it had only just begun. It began with the screams of a hive queen broadcast across 12 systems. Not as a warning, but as bait. Lazarus operatives had captured her weeks earlier, using her pain as a signal amplifier to lure the swarm. The Vorlax responded exactly as predicted. A full-strike fleet arrived to reclaim her, unaware that the gravity fields of the surrounding moons had been altered to mimic safe approach vectors. The moment they entered orbit, every starship was pulled into a collapsing singularity disguised beneath local radiation belts. It wasn't war. It was surgery. Precise, intentional, and merciless. This was Operation Black Echo, one of dozens initiated across compromised sectors. Each one designed to strip the Vorlax of numbers, momentum, and faith in their own invincibility. Human tactics no longer focused on territory or survival. They focused on annihilation. Deny the enemy resources, split their communications, infect their logic cores, destabilize their behavior. The swarm was beginning to stutter. Brief moments of indecision. Fleets abandoning engagements. Nodes issuing contradictory orders. It wasn't just the tactics. It was fear, something the Vorlax were never supposed to experience. The Concord, once horrified by human involvement, now quietly funneled resources to them. Not openly, not officially, but enough to make sure the machines kept running, the agents kept killing, and the swarm kept dying. The Concord's moral backbone had cracked. Survival rewrites ethics, and every alien species watching humanity began to wonder what price was too high. Lazarus' strategies escalated. They began using captured Vorlax drones as carriers for quantum dissonance, biological code that corrupted hive mind networks from within. Entire swarms would suddenly turn on themselves, eating their own ships before detonating in confusion. It wasn't just war. It was defilement. Humanity didn't just want to win. They wanted the Vorlax to remember being broken. One planet was left burning for 9 days straight, not from orbital strikes, but because Lazarus agents seeded the atmosphere with long-chain plasma mines. Every attempt to land or evacuate triggered more fire. Concord observers noted it with cold detachment. One report read, "The humans are willing to render a planet uninhabitable just to make a point. The point is being made." Still, not everyone agreed. A faction within the Concord protested. They argued the humans had gone too far, that they were becoming what they fought. An open debate erupted. A vote was held to remove human operations from Concord jurisdiction. The motion failed, narrowly. It wasn't idealism that tipped the scale, but desperation. The vote's swing came from a species whose homeworld had just been spared by a Lazarus ambush. When asked why they changed their stance, their leader replied, "The humans may be monsters, but there are monsters." Earth itself remained silent. No broadcasts, no updates, no leaders shown. Some said the council had dissolved. Others believed Lazarus had seized control. It didn't matter. Humanity had become decentralized. The war machine ran without politics. Each cell operated independently, bound not by orders, but by purpose. Total elimination of the threat. One mission, classified but eventually leaked, involved detonating a neutron destabilizer inside a binary system. The blast wave rendered both stars inert, collapsing them into a silent rift that devoured 3 nearby Vorlax hives. The cost? irreversible gravitational disruption to neighboring sectors. The gain? A permanent corridor cleared through enemy-controlled space. Concord scientists decried the act. Military commanders quietly mapped routes through the void. Alien civilizations that once saw themselves as protectors of life now imitated human methodology. Covert divisions sprang up. Old treaties were redacted. The line between victory and atrocity blurred, then vanished. And always, behind it all, the specter of humanity loomed larger. They were no longer seen as participants. They were the inevitable escalation. The Vorlax, sensing existential collapse, attempted a counteroffensive unlike any prior. Dozens of fleet clusters launched simultaneous strikes on Concord and human systems. The targets were chosen to overload response capabilities. It almost worked. Almost. But Lazarus had anticipated it. Not by prediction, but pattern exploitation. The swarm moved like organisms. Humans thought like predators. A Lazarus relay fleet deployed null-space jammers across all targeted systems, slowing Vorlax FTL transitions. As each enemy fleet emerged, they found themselves surrounded, cut off, and immediately under attack by weaponized AI formations seeded weeks earlier. Entire fleets didn't just die. They disappeared, consumed by artificial gravity wells or fragmented by precision dark matter charges. No survivors. No remains, just silence and data packets logged for review. Victory was no longer in question. The only remaining unknown was how far humanity would go. In a final broadcast from a captured Vorlax translator core, a chilling phrase emerged from the swarm's collective mind. We cannot kill what has become void. The message was intercepted, decoded, and filed. A Lazarus commander responded with a single statement sent to all Concord channels. That's the idea. There would be no peace. Not until the last node burned and the last hive screamed. The final push wasn't marked by speeches or flags. It began in silence, just like it was meant to end. Vorlax Prime, the center of the swarm, origin of the hive, the pulsating heart of their expansion, was identified through fragmented data collected over a dozen scorched systems. It wasn't a planet in any traditional sense, but a living construct wrapped around a collapsed star, self-regenerating, constantly shifting, and protected by millions of bioships nested like a sentient storm. No Concord race had ever approached it. No one had ever returned. Until now, Lazarus fleets didn't arrive in waves. They emerged simultaneously across all surrounding systems, using slip points too unstable for conventional travel. Dozens of decoy signals scattered the swarm's defensive patterns. While the Vorlax adapted to false threats, the real strike force tunneled through subspace using prototype drives that burned out their own crews. They arrived inside the perimeter, too close to counter, too fast to analyze. No warnings, no negotiation. They detonated reality destabilizers the moment they appeared, unraveling the laws of physics around the Vorlax nodes, tearing apart the coherence of the hive network. Confusion followed, then paralysis, then obliteration. It wasn't just a strike, it was the erasure of existence. The Lazarus Command didn't believe in tactical victories anymore. Every assault was total. They deployed the Silence Protocol, a cascade of entropy bombs designed to fracture the quantum structure of the hive memory grid. The effect wasn't merely destruction. It erased the past. Every echo of Vorlax thought, every strand of collective memory, gone. Not just killed, forgotten. Even in failure, they would leave nothing behind. Some Concord observers attempted to monitor the operation remotely. Their feeds went black one by one, not because they were attacked, but because they couldn't comprehend what was being done. The data they received defied translation. Coordinates failed to map. Timelines refused to synchronize. It was as if the event itself refused to be observed. What happened to Vorlax Prime became legend immediately because no record could hold it. When the silence settled, there were no cheers, no signals, no confirmation. Only one final message broadcast from an untraceable source. Hive neutralized. Operation concluded. Transmission ends. Concord Command convened emergency sessions, trying to determine what would come next. Had humanity finally won? Were they coming back? Would they rejoin the Alliance? But Earth never responded. Its colonies remained silent. The Lazarus network dissolved from detectable space, leaving behind no commanders, no fleets, no living emissaries. Some believed they had gone dormant. Others feared they had gone rogue completely. Most simply didn't want to find out. Reconstruction began. Slowly, fractured worlds reclaimed fragments of peace. Species that had once been rivals now cooperated, bound by survival and guilt. But every new defense doctrine, every training program, every weapon schematic now included human design principles. Former critics now quoted Terran military theory in strategy sessions. The war had changed everything, especially them. Rumors spread in quiet corners of the galaxy. Whole Vorlax remnants turning on each other, still infected by corrupted hive code. Human-made anomalies drifting through space, untouched but pulsing with active power. Unmarked ships seen near ancient ruins, never attacking, always watching. The Concord tried to dismiss the stories, but they kept spreading. And deep down, every species knew the same truth. If humanity was still out there, they were no longer participants in galactic order. They were its final option. Years passed. A fragile stability returned. Trade routes reopened. Borders were redrawn. Children were born who hadn't lived through the swarm. But then came a new signal. Faint. Incomprehensible. Not Vorlax, not Concord. Something else. Something vast. Concord sensors caught a gravity fluctuation large enough to tilt 4 moons in a system beyond map space. A recon drone was dispatched. It vanished. Panic didn't follow immediately, only dread. And into that quiet dread came a message. Short, direct, routed through ancient Earth protocols. New threat detected. Activating contingency. No name, no origin. Just the unmistakable mark of the ones who never stopped adapting. The ones who had buried gods and burned hives. The ones who didn't ask for peace, but enforced survival. The Concord didn't argue. They didn't question. They just made way. Because the war had never really ended. It had only been waiting for the humans to come back.